64. But that man achieves spiritual tranquility who has mastered his mind, and who remains unaffected by sense objects although he may be roaming amidst them, because his senses are properly restrained. Possessed of the means of spiritual realization, the sage who has experienced an intuitive perception of the identity of self and the Supreme Spirit achieves the state of the most sublime peace, because he has subdued his senses, and therefore remained untouched by their objects even though he may be wandering in their midst. No prohibitions are needed for such a man. There is for him nothing unpropitious anywhere against which he should fight and defend himself. There is also for him no good for which he should yearn. Jas less than Ephia. Chapter 2, 83, 65. After realizing the ultimate repose, all the seeker's sorrows disappear, and the blissful mind of such a man quickly grows in firmness. Blessed with a vision of God's ineffable glory and His divine grace, all the worshipper's griefs, the temporal world and its objects which are the abode of all sorrows vanish, and his power of discrimination grows strong and steady. Hereafter, Lord Krishna dwells upon the lot of those who have not achieved the saintly condition. 66. A man without spiritual accomplishment has no wisdom nor true faith, and a man without devotion knows no peace of mind. Since happiness depends on peace, how can such men be happy? A man who has not undertaken meditation is devoid of selfless action-oriented wisdom. This impoverished man is even deficient in the feeling of devotion to the all-pervading Spirit. How can such a man, without an awareness of the self within and the God without, be at peace? And how can he, without peace, experience happiness? There can be no devotion without knowing the object of devotion, and knowledge comes from contemplation. Without devotion there can be no peace, and a man with a disturbed mind cannot experience happiness, much less the state of changeless, eternal bliss. 67. 4. As the wind captures the boat on water, just so even one of the senses, that roam amidst objects of their gratification and with which the intellect dwells, is strong enough to sweep away the discrimination of one who is unpossessed of spiritual attainment. Omios me J. 84. Yatharth. As the wind drives a boat far away from its destination, even one out of the five senses roving amongst objects perceived by the intellect can get hold of the man who has not undertaken the task of spiritual quest and discipline. Therefore incessant remembrance of God is essential. Lord Krishna again dwells upon the importance of action-oriented conduct. 68. Therefore, O the mighty armed Arjun, the man who prevents his senses from straying to objects has a steady discrimination. The man who restricts his senses from being drawn to their objects is a man of steady wisdom. Arm is a measure of the sphere of action. God is called mighty armed, Mahabahu, although he is bodiless and works everywhere without hands and feet. The one who becomes one with him or is inclined to him and is on the way to his sublime splendor is also therefore mighty armed. That is the significance of the use of this epithet for both Lord Krishna and Arjun. 69. The true worshipper yogi remains awake amidst what is night for all creatures, but the perishable and transient worldly pleasures amidst which all living creatures stay awake are like night for the sage who has perceived reality. The transcendental spirit is like night for living beings because he can be neither seen nor comprehended by thought. So he is like night, But it is in this night that the spiritually conscious man remains awake because he has seen the formless and known the incomprehensible. The seeker finds access to God through control of senses, peace of mind, and meditation. That is why the perishable worldly pleasures for which living beings toil day after day is night for God's true worshipper. Lemci Imusenains Ave. Chapter 2, 85. The sage alone, who beholds the individual self and the universal self and is indifferent to desire, succeeds in his enterprise of God realization. So he dwells in the world and is yet untouched by it. Let us now see what Lord Krishna has to say on the way in which this realized sage conducts himself. 70. As the water of the many rivers falls into the full and ever-constant ocean without affecting its tranquility, even so the pleasures of sense merge into a man of steady discrimination without producing any deviation, and such a man attains to the state of the most sublime peace rather than yearn for sensual enjoyment. The full and changeless ocean assimilates all the rivers that flow violently into it without losing its repose. Similarly, the man who is aware of the oneness of his self and the Supreme Spirit assimilates all worldly pleasures within himself without in any way straying from his chosen path. Rather than longing for sensual gratification, he aims at the achievement of the most sublime bliss of uniting his self with the Supreme God. Ravaging everything that comes in their way, crops, men and animals, and their habitations, and with a frightening roar, the violently sweeping currents of hundreds of rivers fall into the ocean with a tremendous force, but they can neither raise nor lower its level by even an inch, they only merge into the ocean. In the same violent way sensual pleasures assault the sage who has attained knowledge of reality and merge in him. They can impress on him neither weal nor woe. The actions of a worshipper are non-good and non-evil, they transcend good and evil. The minds which are conscious of God, restrained and dissolved, bear only the mark of divine excellence. So how can any Dhetu and Sisasiuiful per mil be? May Segoch, me fle, Aporyama, Sa Yan, 86. Yatharth, other impression be made on such a mind. The actions of enlightened yogi are neither auspicious nor inauspicious. In this one verse, thus, Lord Krishna has answered several of Arjun's queries. Arjun was curious to learn the mark of a sage who knows the divine reality, how he speaks, how he sits, how he walks. With the single word, ocean, the omniscient Lord Krishna answers all these questions. The mark of a sage is that he is like an ocean. Like an ocean he is not bound by rules, that he must sit like this and walk like that. It is men like him who achieve the ultimate peace, for they have self-control. They who yearn for pleasure can have no peace. 71. The man who has renounced all desire, and who conducts himself without ego, arrogance, and attachment, is the one who achieves peace. Men who have given up all desire, and whose actions are entirely free from the feelings of I and mine, realize the ultimate peace beyond which there is nothing to strive for and achieve. 72. Such, O Arjun, is the steadfastness of the man who has realized God. After attaining to this state he subdues all temptation and, resting firmly in his faith, with his death he continues in this state of rapture of the union of his self with God. Such is the state of one who has realized God. Rivers of temporal objects merge into these ocean-like sages who are endowed with self-control and an intuitive perception of God. Merely by reading or uttering, Aham Brahmasmi, this state cannot be attained. By adopting the spiritual practice alone, it can be achieved. Such persons while staying in the supreme state attain this supreme bliss itself even at the time of their passing away. Ifyenukayasivu. Chapter 287. It is said by some that the Gita is completed in the second chapter itself. But the chapter can be accepted as a conclusion only if all the implications of action karma get elucidated by a mere naming of the process. In this chapter Lord Krishna has told Arjuna to listen to him on the way of selfless action, for by knowing it he will be liberated from the shackles of material life. He has the right only to act, but he has no right to the fruits of his action. At the same time he ought not to lose dedication to action. He must always be prepared to act. By the performance of such action he secures the most exalted knowledge of the self and of God, and achieves ultimate peace. All this Lord Krishna has said, but not what action is. In fact, the section popularly known as the Yoga or Way of Discrimination is not a chapter, it is but a contrivance of reviewers rather than a creation of the poet of the Gita. There is nothing surprising in this, because we can at best interpret a work only according to our own understanding. In this chapter, as we have seen, by expounding the merits of action, and by indicating the precautions to be observed in the performance of action as well as the characteristic marks of the sage who has gained direct knowledge of the self and God through perception, Lord Krishna has aroused Arjuna's curiosity and also answered some of his queries. The self is immutable and eternal. Arjuna is exhorted to know it in order to learn reality. There are two ways of acquiring this knowledge, the way of discrimination or knowledge and the way of selfless action. Performance of the required action after a careful review of one's capacity and self-determination is the way of knowledge, whereas applying oneself to the same task with loving dependence on the worshipped God is the way of selfless action, also known as the way of pious devotion Bhakti Marg. Goswami Tulsidas has portrayed the two ways, both leading to ultimate liberation. Thus, I have two sons. The elder son is a man of discrimination. But the younger one is a mere boy, devoted to me like a faithful servant and desirous only of rendering me service and homage. The latter thus relies on me, whereas the 88. Yatharth Gita former depends upon his own prowess. Both of them have, however, to struggle and fight against the same enemies, namely, passion and anger. Lord Krishna says in the same way that he has two kinds of devotees. There is first the follower of the way of knowledge Gyanmargi. Secondly, there is the follower of the way of devotion Bhaktimargi. The man of devotion or doer of selfless action finds refuge in God and proceeds on his chosen path with total dependence on His grace. Possessed of confidence in his own strength, on the contrary, the man of discrimination goes along his way after making a proper evaluation of his own ability, as well as of the profit and loss in the enterprise. But the two have a common goal and the same enemies. Not only the man of discrimination, but also the man of devotion has to overcome the same adversaries, namely, anger, desire, and other impieties. Both of them have to renounce desire, and the action, too, that has to be performed under both the disciplines is one and the same. Supreme peace can be attained by performance of this action, yet Lord Krishna has not at this point explained fully to Arjuna what this action is about altogether. Thus concludes the second chapter, in the Upanishad of the Srimad Bhagavad-Gita, on the knowledge of the Supreme Spirit, the science of Yoga, and the dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna, entitled Karma Jigyasa, or Curiosity about Action. Thus concludes the most revered Paramhans Paramanand Ji's disciple Swami Adgadanand's exposition of the second chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad-Gita in Yatharth Gita, entitled Karma Jigyasa. Hari Om Tat Sat.